Ki-woo Kim is a young guy who lives in poverty with his family in the slums of an unnamed South Korean city, with his father, Ki-taek Kim, mother Chung-sook Kim, and sister Ki-jung. The family lives in a garden apartment where they struggle to get a Wi-Fi signal to sneak into, to watch TV, get fumigated, and have to watch males peeing in the lane outside their door. They make ends meet by doing basic work like folding pizza boxes, and even then, they are scolded by the pizza employees for sloppy folding. Ki-woo's wealthy buddy Min-hyuk pays the family a visit and presents them with a gift, a rock that is said to bring wealth and prosperity to those who possess it. He then informs Ki-woo that he has been instructing the adolescent daughter of an affluent family. He is leaving to study overseas, but he is head over heels in love with the daughter and knows that any of the other university lads would steal her away. He wants Ki-woo to be her tutor so that Min-hyuk can propose to her once she graduates from high school. Ki-woo is aware that he is not qualified because he is not in college, but Min-hyuk pledges to advocate for him, so he agrees and has Ki-jung fake credentials for him to bring to his interview. Ki-woo does an interview with the exceedingly wealthy Park family, where he meets Mr. Park, his scatterbrained wife, Mrs. Park, and their children, Da-hai, a teen, and Dae-song, a young boy. Ki-woo learns he needs to flirt with Da-hai in order to obtain the job, which he accomplishes. Da-song needs an art tutor. Da-song experienced a traumatic incident in which he saw a ghost in the house and had a seizure, and he has been in need of assistance with his art ever since. Ki-jung leaves her undergarments in the car to get the park's limo driver fired. She then offers her uncle as the new driver, who is actually Ki-taek. The final post is that of Moon-kwang, the housekeeper. She has been working for the house since before the Parks moved there. She used to work for the previous owner, an eccentric architect. To get her fired, the Kims play on her peach sensitivity, causing her to have adverse responses. They then convince Mrs. Park that she is extremely contagious and cannot be around their son. She leaves, heartbroken, and Mrs. Kim is hired, duping the Park family into hiring the entire Kim family. When the Park family decides to go camping for Da-song's birthday weekend, the Kim family takes advantage of the opportunity to stay in the enormous Park house for the weekend. They've been drinking and eating and making a mess of the place all evening when the doorbell rings. It's Moon-kwang. Mrs. Kim hesitantly lets her in, and Moon-kwang dashes down the basement and screams, revealing a secret entrance behind some bookcases. She visits her spousey, Geun-sae, who has been living in the bunker since the previous owner walked out to avoid debt sharks. Mrs. Kim looks on in horror as she gives him food. She tells Moon-kwang she needs to leave, and as Moon-kwang begs her to let them stay, the rest of the Kim family, who had been eavesdropping, falls off the stairs and into view, and they call each other dad, etc., which Moon-kwang films on her phone, realizing the family's con. She threatens to send it to the Park family and uses this to push the Kim family to do their bidding. The Kims have the upper hand, gaining access to the secret bunker, but the Parks call. They've canceled their camping trip due to weather and will be home in 8 minutes. The Kims hurry to clean up as much as possible while keeping the other two in the basement. They perform a good enough job that the rest of the family can hide as Mrs. Kim serves the Park's dinner. When Moon-kwang escapes and goes upstairs, Mrs. Kim shoves Moon-kwang back down the steps, where she bangs her head and is gravely injured. Moon-kwang and Geun-sae have been imprisoned in the bunker. Mr. and Mrs. Park end up staying in the living room to keep a watch on Da-song, who is camping out in the backyard, forcing the Kims to stay under the table, frozen all night, even while the Parks grumble about Mr. Kim's odor. They eventually sneak out in the middle of the night. When they go home, their apartment is fully inundated with rain and sewage. Ki-woo takes the rock, and the family spends the night at a shelter. Mrs. Park decides to organize an impromptu celebration for Da-song the next day. The Kim family is invited and must pretend that they are unaware that there are 2 persons confined in a bunker beneath the house. Ki-woo brings the rock down into the bunker where Moon-kwang has died, only to be ambushed by Geun-sae, who bludgeons him in the head with the rock. He then enters the gathering, stabbing Ki-jung in the chest. The celebration devolved into a nightmare, and Da-song had a seizure. Geun-sae was the ghost he had seen in the house earlier. Mr. Park screams at his driver, Mr. Kim, who is attempting to stop Ki-jung's bleeding, and throws the car keys to him. They fall beneath Geun-sae, who is engaged in a battle with Mrs. Kim. She kills him by stabbing him with a meat skewer. Mr. Park obtains the keys but expresses disgust at Geun-sae's odor, which provokes Mr. Kim, who snaps and stabs Mr. Park to death. Mrs. Park passes out as Mr. Kim escapes. Ki-woo awakens in the hospital after being in a coma for weeks. He discovers Ki-jung's death, and he and Mrs. Kim are sentenced to probation. There has been no indication of Mr. Kim, despite the fact that authorities have been searching for him for Mr. Park's murder all throughout the country. Ki-woo and examines the former Park house, where he notices the lights flickering in Morse code. Ki-woo translates the flickering from Morse code and learns Mr. Kim is controlling the lights from inside the bunker, where he is now residing, creeping upstairs for food from the new owners. Ki-woo writes his father a letter back, vowing that one day he will be wealthy enough to buy the mansion and reunite their family.